Leftists are progressive and demand big changes to the social and economic order of society. For this reason, discussions around leftism will inevitably lead to discussion of how to bring about this change. The main strategies for progressive political change are revolution and its main alternative, which is of course reform. Both have their place and can be very useful for improving society and people's lives. Reform generally describes the changing of a system from the inside. Primary examples of left-wing reformists could include people like Bernie Sanders and many of his social democrat supporters. These people want to change society peacefully through exploiting systems such as democracy that are already in place. Reform is non-violent and does have the capacity to improve societies and people's lives. There is no doubt that reform has its benefits and should be made use of by leftists seeking power to improve society. Reform does, however, have its flaws. Flaws of reform could include the fact that many systems that are used for reform, such as democracy, are often tipped in the favour of the ruling class, making it difficult to extract solid change through reform. Unfortunately, reform is often watered down and/or reversed, limiting its capacity to create real change. This is not to say that reform is useless. Reform has had its successes, and it certainly has its place, and should be employed by the political left. In some more authoritarian nations, the option of reform is basically non-existent, as people do not have the freedom of speech, freedom of the press, or democracy. Without these political features, it can be virtually impossible to participate in any meaningful reform. It is the unfortunate shortcomings of reform through which the idea of revolution emerges. Revolution is the forceful overthrow of an existing political system in favour of a new system. A leftist revolution is not limited to ideas of guerrillas with guns seizing power. The core strength of any leftist revolution would come from work actions such as general strikes and other mass organised work action. Revolution can, and often does, end up being bloody. For this reason, revolution is not a subject to be glorified or spoken of lightheartedly. Revolution is a very serious political strategy that can have very bad impacts if it does not work out. It is my view that in order to be justified, a revolution must meet the following three standards. Is revolution the only viable option? A revolution is not a good idea if there are better, more peaceful and efficient alternatives. Will the revolution lead to worthwhile change that will better society? A revolution is not worth it if it will not improve society to a reasonable degree. Can the revolution be won? Obviously, you should not be attempting a revolution if you do not have a good chance of winning, as a loss will likely worsen the position of the left. If the answer to these three questions is yes, then revolution is a good idea. There is much worthwhile conversation to be had around the idea of revolution and the idea of reform. So long as the necessary nuance is present, leftists can have very productive conversations about these ideas. So long as we examine all the options clearly and to remember that our goal is to better society and the conditions of the worker, the left can successfully use both of these ideas to make change.